Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. The best way you can support me is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack. Thanks for the latest review on Apple. Someone said, love the content and the variety of guests. Would have gone 5 stars, but for the ads. Try Paul Harvey's approach instead. First of all, whoever wrote that ad, maybe send me a message because I don't know who Paul Harvey is or what his approach is. So do let me know. But also, like, there's no way for me to continue without the ads, so they're going to have to stay. But again, you have the option to buy the Apple subscription for $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, where the ads are removed. And soon I'll set up Supercast, which will do the same thing on any other podcast player. So you have that option to not listen to the ads or become a Substack paid subscriber, which also you can listen without the ads. All right, joining us for the first time is Dr. Mathew Maavak, who researches systems science, global risks, geopolitics, strategic foresight, governance, and artificial intelligence. He's the author of a brand new book, a novel that he just published titled The Electric Reckoning. Welcome, Mathew.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on your show. Finally.
Yeah, finally. So I was going to say, I followed your work for quite a while. You've also contributed to RT, and we've been sporadically in touch for a few years now. And finally have you on. We're both pretty much, I believe, on the same frequency here. And whatever you want to tell us about yourself and the work that you've been doing, you've got your Substack, so all of that is linked in the description.
Well, one of the hardest things to express is about oneself. I mean, I was born in Malaysia. I grew up here. And even as a kid, I realized that the system was decked against me. I do believe in meritocracy. Unfortunately, it was not. Meritocracy was constricted out here, highly constricted, and I initially thought that the West offered a better system, but I realized that it's the same crap everywhere. There might be affirmative action here, there might be another patronage system there, and therefore, my first job was in the media. And I had to write articles that were hopelessly mediocre. And they didn't allow you to write anything sophisticated. That was reserved for, a certain, credential classes, connected classes. And they were appalling, mind you. They were appalling. And I told myself that I'm going to rise above this morass. And so, I wouldn't even read the paper I'd worked for, and I would read, foreign publications, and because of the lack of opportunities here, what transpired was one day I got so angry that I clacked out an article titled "The Clash of Civilizations" or something like that, and I sent it to a journal in the U.S. It was called the Online Journal. At one time, it was a reputed journal, it was well known. It does not exist anymore. And I was surprised that, it was published, and there was a Nobel Prize winner there, and a couple of academics, world famous academics featured. Then I told myself, if I can get into this league, effortlessly, why am I wasting time, trying to make it big here? Because you have to make a lot of compromises, too many compromises. And I'll give you one example. A few years back, I was interviewed for a job as the head of corporate communications at an oil company, oil and gas company. And I was the one of only 2 finalists, and I breezed through. Later, the head of HR told me, your job will be easy. All you have to do is entertain clients, and then take care of the editorial and so on. I said, no problem, And then he said, some of these clients, they can be quite boisterous, they like booze and so on. I said, no problem, there's no law against getting drunk, you know, and so on. So like, and then he said, sometimes they would also, like want you to get them girls. And I said, no, that is something I will not do, because you're directly participating in human trafficking. No woman would want to, pursue a profession like that. No woman in her right mind. So I tell him that's something I will never ever do. So I didn't get the job. So like these are the kind of compromises. It's just a snapshot, just an example of the myriad, compromises you have to make, like to navigate through society, like chasing the, like uh, like the corporate ladder or whatever, like a benchmark society sets. Even the academia, I mean, like the amount of bullshit you need to, wade through is just amazing. It's just like a mind-boggling. And and this is a reason why I believe like concepts like the world government, new world order, the Great Reset will fail, because those are supposed to prop this high tech mega structures, are not competent. They are not at all competent. And coming back to the COVID-19 crisis, I mean, it was an engineered crisis. I think we all agree on that. Maybe we disagree on certain minutiae, like like certain details, but overall, it was engineered. I mean, it was. I mean, the propaganda level itself was off the charts, and why did it fail? Like they really had like the technological tools to perpetuate these mandates, to drive us into a digital gulag. So why did it fail? So in my opinion, it failed because like those who were entrusted to execute this plan were incompetent, were, were thoroughly incompetent. So like it just flopped. Also, like there were certain instances that happened during the COVID-19 crisis that did not make sense to me. Even today, I mean, even today, like I just have a broad hypothesis, but nothing beyond that. Why did China close down for nearly 2 years? I mean, China locked itself down for nearly, I think, 2 years. Correct me if I'm wrong. Were they really that scared? Now there were, like there were theories that China was war gaming. They were hardening their society. Yeah, that could be that could be a reasonable explanation. But why did you need to weld people shut in their apartments for that? And for war gaming, you only need 6 months to a year, not nothing longer than that. So it didn't make sense. And I think the Chinese, this is just my hypothesis, my theory. The Chinese were terrified that of U.S. Biowarfare capabilities, and that they were being targeted. I mean, I was in Moscow earlier this year, and Jeffrey Sachs, for the umpteenth time, stated that like uh, COVID-19, the virus, was manufactured in a U.S. lab. He mentioned North Carolina, and he keeps saying that North Carolina. So I'm not sure like which facility. I think he was referring to University of North Carolina, but I think we all know that it did not really come from China. It may have been leaked there, or it may have been introduced there, like a few months before, it became a so-called pandemic. And even then, like attributing the term pandemic to that farce is like it's a gross exaggeration. I mean, we have seen the Wuhan flops, where people suddenly drop in the middle of the street, which was not repeated elsewhere. And how many people in Africa died, from the COVID-19? I mean, Africa should be, like one of the worst hits, like continents on the planet. And their vaccination rate up till 2023 was in the single digits. I mean, Google would publish, like the vaccination rates of all countries, when you key in, the right term. And I mean, you just have to key in, Africa vaccination rates, give you a breakdown. But they stopped doing that, in the sometime around the middle of 2023, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
That's because
let me ask you, and this is why I find it so valuable to speak with people from all around the world. And you're out there in Malaysia, so you're giving us an Asian perspective. And in your book, by the way, if I haven't mentioned already, the Electric Reckoning, it's fiction, in a way, science dystopian fiction, and I love it. I'm like a third of the way through, and I immediately said. I'm as I'm reading it, I'm actually visualizing. It's so well written and so entertaining. Like literally the first paragraph in, I almost like was freaking out because you're painting this dystopian scenario. I mean, it's like Hunger Games, it's like Maze Runner, it's like, and I'm like, oh, you're right. I gotta get out of the city. I gotta run for the hills, and I can see this sort of scenario coming. But what you're talking about now with COVID, that's partially in. That story is in your novel, and I just want to ask you. My view was that they, as you say, I think you're probably right. They were not competent enough to do it. But you also have in your novel. I mean, I haven't finished the book, but they're talking about plans to, and we're seeing that now as we speak. Like in your novel, they're talking about the French. One of the French institutes said the bird flu that's coming is going to be far worse than COVID. And what was it this week? They were Pegasus. UK ran simulation where the children, always with the children, right? And so I get what you're saying that they failed, but do you think they'll try something again like that?
in fact, in my novel, there was a second pandemic that killed 16 million people. It involved a real virus, real vectors like bats, birds, and another vector I mentioned. And yet the vaccine uptake was abysmal. That's because people, saw through the plot. They didn't care, they just revolted, and vaccination certificates were forged on an industrial scale, and the pandemic just flopped. Now, there's another reason, and this will be broached in an upcoming article. It'll be published on December 5th on my Substack. What was the real purpose of COVID-19? One hypothesis is that it had to do with global depopulation. But you can depopulate, entire continents via various ways. Okay, fine. Another hypothesis was it was to usher in the global digital ID. But the digital ID system has been creeping into the system for a long, long time. And you don't need, microchip on your right hand. Your face and your gait is enough to, to recognize. I mean, for recognition, you don't need a retinal scan as well. Maybe in top secret, ultra secure facilities. Yeah, but overall, your face is good enough, for this digital panopticon. So, what was the other hypothesis? Well, there was something else. Yeah, it 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 was also a plot to bioengineer humans via the vaccine, via the virus and the vaccine. Okay, fine. All these theories have merit, but one theory I have, and as far as I know, I'm the only one who clings to it. This is my primary hypothesis. They were stress testing or obedience testing the global leadership, right from the top down to the civil society level. They wanted to see who are our top lapdogs, who are the ones who would obey us. And in that sense, they succeeded. There was pan global conformity. Whether it was the Kremlin, whether it was China, whether anywhere, for that matter. the obedience was scary. It was almost 100%. Only the Tanzanian president, among a few other African presidents, balked. And in my book, although I didn't mention him by name, I did mention the fact that an African president sent samples, quite a number of samples, to a WHO, affiliated lab, and they returned positive. And then on live TV, he announced that this samples came from quail blood, engine oil, papaya, and a few other stuff, and they tested positive. And actually, it was based on a real story. It was John Magufuli from Tanzania, who exposed that fraud. And not surprisingly, he died soon after. I mean, he was in the pink of health, and he died of heart attack, soon after that. And nobody talks about that, how did that happen? It's not like he sent the samples to a regional, outdated lab. He sent it to a lab that was to labs that were affiliated to the WHO. So I mean, I don't know where to start and where to end, with this corona psychosis.
Would you agree that it's? I mean, would you agree that obviously I view all of this? It was just not just some one-off event. It's part of like multi-layered, plan. And
Yeah,
where do you? And that's I think that's the first time I've heard anyone say. Having read about a third to close to half of your book, what you said makes perfect sense. You flesh it out in your book. And it's very much, again, like Maze Runner, like Hunger Games. In fact, I only watched the first Maze Runner film many years ago, and I never watched the sequels. And today, after reading your book, I got copies, and I want to go back and rewatch the first and see the other sequels. But my question is, it sounds like it does sound like a stress test. So that means that they've got something else up their sleeve. Obviously, they're not gonna give up.
they are not going to give up because they have everything to lose. The cat is out of the bag, so to speak. But whether they'll succeed or not is a different proposition altogether. They'll have to rely on middle-ranking managers, middle-ranking engineers, down to the to those at the clerical level, the grunt level, soldiers and policemen. Now, many of the soldiers and policemen would know someone or would have had, some family member was impaired by the COVID vaccine. So how are you going to, engineer another crisis and expect total obedience? Now, unless, there's a Satan unleashes, 1,000 demons around the world, something like the end time scenario. I don't see that happening. I see that failing spectacularly. In fact, I'm pretty sure, my Christian eschatology is very different from the one peddled by the evangelicals, which is basically based on
Sensationalism.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And Christian Zionism. I don't really believe in a 7-year timeline because in Revelations chapter 12 itself, God's wrath begins. I think begins at the third chapter. But in chapter 12, I believe it's chapter 12, at the vision of the woman, in the skies and 12 stars under her feet, with the moon and so on, that refers to the birth of Christ. So what the book of Revelations is basically doing is it's metaphorically unpacking the a spiritual battle that's been happening since the fall in Eden, leading up to a climax. So I do believe, coming back to the topic, I do believe that they will try. They will try, via another pandemic, or like in my novel, they might try cyber hacking. They might try bringing down the utilities, in various nations. I mean, just imagine, your electricity supply goes off. You're not able to communicate. And what happens when electricity goes off? You can't charge your phone. When you can't charge your phone, your camera does not work. So a lot of, like that, your phone camera, in my opinion, the smartphone camera is the one restrainer that prevents people from behaving in a barbaric way. Right now, they can't do that because they don't want to be captured on camera. Like earning racist abuse or like beating someone to pulp. But when electricity is absent, and your phone does not work after 3 days, society, can plunge into barbarism. So to me, that's why, my novel focuses on that plot. But of course, someone else hijacks your plan and everything goes all right. So like, yeah. So I don't think they will try the pandemic route. I think they will try the cyber hacking, route where they'll take out, the electricity supply and the communications network. It will be targeted. But again, uh, I don't think it will work because the the kind of caliber needed to carry out such an operation. I mean, there's no meritocracy. You need brains, to carry this out. So like, I doubt it will work.
Maybe just to go further on that point, because you have background here, I think, some technical background, and in your book, and this is something that's being discussed as we speak. Artificial intelligence, AI. In my weekly analysis for subscribers, I was looking at data where even AI experts tell their friends and families don't use AI, like generative AI. It makes so many errors. And just the energy that's needed, the hard drives that they announced there's going to be a 2-year backlog in SSD drives, hard drives. Like, you got to be swapping those out every few years. The minerals and resources that go into that, everything is just so finite. And I just, as you describe in your novel, and then the competence, like actually yesterday, I mean, that was in my weekly analysis I published yesterday. Amazon fired 2,000 of some of their top level people that built like AWS. And in this analysis, it was saying like, what are you doing? Because you can't just replace it with AI. I mean, some of the things that are that's in this infrastructure is legacy stuff, just like you explained in your book. And then if you don't have experts, it's literally going to be like Idiocracy, the movie. No?
Yeah, AI can replace a lot of workers, a whole lot of workers. But at the same time, you need master generalists, those, who can see the big picture and who are also qualified to troubleshoot. Now, how do you identify them? Our global human resource system it just sucks. The best do not get identified. Now, one way to identify them would be via AI. When you use ChatGPT, when someone uses ChatGPT, they can immediately flag, okay, this guy is a thinker, or this woman, is asking serious questions. So I think that's going on in the background. But at the same time, all these oligarchs, I mean, they are not really that free anyway. They are beholden to, the puppet masters behind the scenes. They are beholden to each other. They'll have to, create sinecures to morons, who are, connected to these people and so on. And these people, in turn, are standing in the way of, technical synergy, that's needed to come up with a system that's fully automated. So that's a human resource problem, and I'm not sure whether this mass layoff will succeed. Whether a lot of thought has gone into it, because AI does malfunction. I mean, like I've seen AI hallucinating. It's a fantastic tool. I mean, the AIs have used fantastic tools, but it's, in an article for RT, I mentioned why, only a certain percentage of people can ride on the crest of the ongoing AI tsunami. These are the harnesses. They are like those, on a boat, and they can, adjust the sails accordingly, and sail through on. And then there's the majority, that's the herd. They just follow, and these are the people, like, who will be, victims of, mass automation and mass deployment of AI. Uh, will it work? Yeah, it should work. But again, that's a human resource problem right at the top. It's a pandemic. It has infected, the C-suite. It has infected, the higher echelons of engineers at, various big tech corporations. And engineers are not given the chance, to do, what is optimal, because the managers, have a brighter idea, or they want a quick return, because, like, they need to look good, for the year end KPIs and so on. So whatever they are planning, it's going to fail spectacularly. I'll give you one recent example. Just a few days back, Airbus grounded. Uh, I mean, Airbus recommended grounding 6,000 of its aircraft. Why? Because there was a software update that could not handle solar flares or solar radiation. So they recommended that these aircraft be grounded, and the older software be used. So they have to remove, this new software. And 6,000 aircraft is a lot. It's a lot, and it needs to be done by skilled personnel. So we are building more complexities into every system. I mean, just like my aircon, it's a very complex. It was a very complex aircon when I bought it about 11 years back, and now it's like it's died on me. Compare this to my previous, like a place of residence. The aircon in that room was older than me, and I'm 55 years old, and it worked like a dream, I mean, during those days, they were built to last. And nowadays, you have a lot of fragile stuff. You have a lot of, they think uh, AI is the magic bullet that will solve all our problems. And this is a reason why, what do you call that? Continental cars are now basically no better than junk. American and Continental cars. The reputation of Mercedes, once, the beacon of longevity and reliability, has just nosedived, because they built in so much complexity into the system that it just cannot function. And it's the same with governance. It's the same with the military, and everywhere where you find a system, it's getting overly complex. In fact, I just wrote an essay titled "Peak Complexity," and why, like, the only way out for us is to simplify things, simplify products, and so on. But then we have the climate agenda that's pushing, like, us to get the most uh, out of everything, and often at the cost of lives. I remember this Boeing 737 Max, which was connected to a software, like update. They tried to use AI, I believe, to get the aircraft aerodynamically stable. And two crashes occurred, I think, a few months apart, and they had to ground it just to save, a few pennies on fuel. That's what they're doing. And that's the reason why Japanese cars, except for Nissan, Japanese cars are doing very well. They are reliable, and Toyota is it's one company that would be the first to test the system and the last to deploy it. they put their systems through rigorous checks, and Toyota is known to be reliable. And you could say the same about all cars under the Toyota stable, or like affiliated to them, like Mazda, excellent car, and even the Malaysian Perodua, excellent car, reliable. So these are not, the cutting edge, like level 5 autonomous driving kind of vehicles. They do have a lot of high tech, sensors and so on, but these are designed in such a way to avoid complexity overload. So basically, when you have a governance system that's so complex, how are you going to implement your new world order? You know, I mean, we have a bloated government in Malaysia. You know, like our ratio of government servants to the population is pretty high. Now, if you have a technocracy, a lot of them would have to be laid off. You know, to ensure optimal, optimal efficiency or whatever. How are you going to lay them off without, inviting, a blowback? It's, social blowback. So, like no matter how you look at it, they will try. They will try something very dastardly. They might even, get a nuke and blow it up somewhere. But it's not gonna work. It's not gonna work.
So this is, I mean, that's also a scene from your novel related
Yeah, yeah,
to nukes. We don't have to give everything away, but I mean, this is good news. I would agree with you that ultimately they're doomed to fail any which way you cut it, whether you're looking at it from a biblical worldview, because God has
yeah,
already said it's not
yeah.
going to work. But even if you remove the Bible from the equation, just systems complexity, it's not going to work, and at some point the whole structure is going to fall in on itself. Let me then ask you just, and by the way, I wanted to mention what we started out with. As you were defining academia, I worked at high school and university. I don't want to go back there. You talked about in my mind, I was thinking the soul crushing neo feudal system, right? And I'm being interviewed by people, and I'm interviewing people who are self-publishing their books. I hope people go out and buy your book again, The Electric Reckoning, because I just had on, for example, Matt Smith, who self-published The Preparation, and it's been doing very well. There's a German podcast I was just a guest on. I don't think it's been published yet. Tom, let me pull up his name real quick. Tom Regener. Let me see. Tom Oliver Regenauer. He's been self-publishing his books, and he says they've been selling better, and he's been getting more profit than if he went with a publisher. And this just goes to speak to the institutions are failing, and we just need to get away from them, not pay attention to them, and strike our own path. But just to go back to what you were talking about, how about what's your thought then on digital ID? So okay, they tried the biosecurity, biodigital thing. Now all of a sudden, like, this is for me number one, what I see on their list. You're seeing it here in Mexico, you're seeing it in EU, you're seeing it in the United States, you're seeing it in Australia, UK. They're quickly moving to implement age verification and digital ID. In Mexico, they say next year you won't be able to do anything: buy houses, sell, school, pensions, get married, divorce, without your biometric digital ID. I feel like it's going to be painful, them trying to implement it for us. What are your thoughts with systems like digital ID and so forth?
Well, one problem with that is like, well, what happens during an outage? You remember a few weeks ago, like maybe 2 months ago, Amazon Web Services had a massive outage, and people, was it Amazon or Microsoft? I think both of them.
Was it Cloudflare maybe?
Yeah, I think it's Cloudflare. Yeah, Cloudflare. That's right. And I think one of them was linked to Microsoft. And anyway, it it suffered an outage for a few days, and people were stuck at airports, and there was a ripple effect, which was not given the due attention it deserved. The media wanted to forget it. And you can expect outages like this, like blooming, like weeds all across the digital ecosystem, because the people, entrusted to, to maintain this digital ID systems, they are not cut out for it. They are not the best of the best. The best of the best had, like exited the system long back. They tried to fit in. A lot of them tried to fit in. Like even at one time, even I tried to fit in. Like into the mainstream, and then I realized that like I was losing my self-respect. And this was at a time when like I lost faith in God and so on. But like I actually started losing myself. I mean, losing self-respect, and I just not like go on doing that. And also, who would want to work under someone who is grossly like underqualified or not qualified, but they got that position because they're connected. And such a person will not like just rest his legs and give you like a free rein to do what's supposed to be done. He needs to like he or she needs to like self-validate their worth, their sense of worth, and then they'll be giving out contradictory orders and things that don't make sense and so on. So I don't. They will try, just like they tried with COVID-19, with all their mandates and so on, and things that only got worse. Now, I bet you right now, if you check, whether there's a global talent crisis all across the world now, unemployment has been rising worldwide, dramatically, and nations have been fudging their unemployment statistics. But at the same time, there's also a global talent crisis. Why is this happening? It's been there, like it's been like getting more and more cancerous, for the past 25 years, and nothing has been done. Like the last time I checked, like that was, I think, a decade back. There was a acute shortage of 95 million or something, skilled personnel in certain sectors. I think it was 95. This is a long time back, okay, at least a decade back. And now I think like it's got even worse, like, so I don't see, this digital ID thing, panning out. And also there are competing big tech systems that need to be integrated. And as was mentioned in my book, it's, that's easier said than done. You have legacy systems, that do not communicate with each other. Like whenever you try to integrate various softwares, you'll have gremlins in the system as well. And so uh, the way I see it is, like they'll fail. That's primarily because it's too complex. And another reason is because those who are entrusted to carry this out, they're not cut out for it. They're grossly incompetent, and they do have the paper qualifications. That's all. And we have seen how a lot of H-1B workers in the US have have fake degrees and so on. Like India is getting a bad rap because of that, and not just in the United States, but even in Singapore. Down in Singapore, a lot of Singaporeans, like are bristling with rage. They are being pushed out of jobs. While those jobs are given to foreigners, especially those from India in the tech sector. And like, and here's something like like I want the readers to consider: if India was so good in digital technologies, how come we don't have an Indian operating system? You know, how come? I mean, have you used an app that was created by Indians? Forget about the operating system, an app. Let's say a gaming app, a good app, where like you like to spend your spare time. Like if you're waiting for waiting for someone somewhere, and you need to kill time. Like just play a few games, puzzles and so on. I like puzzles. No. Are any of them, like created in India? No, no. So what you have is at the best middleware, middleware kind of expertise, where they can plug, certain, like gaps in the software systems. They can carry out, basic coding, which can be replaced by AI.
or
So,
even their Aadhaar system. It's a tragedy. What I've been reading, like it's failed, it's been hacked,
yeah,
but which has ruined people's lives because the system had
yeah,
failed, and people now have no access to food, and they're starving to death.
yeah. Like there are lots of horror stories, like linked to that Aadhaar system, and that's not all. It was supposed to be a national security project where non-citizens will not get access to Aadhaar. But you pay the right sum of money, which is not that much in India. You get a brand new identity altogether. Complete with like the perks that come with Aadhaar. So yeah, you also have corruption to deal with in many parts of the world, and not just the third world, even the United States. Like a lot of people like who read the mainstream media, they tend to think like, yeah, the third world is much more corrupt than the first world. Yes, at the ground level, you do see a lot of corruption. For instance, like if you're in the United States, you're caught for like speeding, you just don't roll out like a bundle of notes, and expect to get away like you do in India and and maybe in other parts of the world. But there's a lot of structural corruption in the West. Lots and lots of structural corruption as well. So against this backdrop, I wonder really like whether they can actually like enforce any mandate on us for too long. And remember, even when you look from a when you try to analyze this through a spiritual lens, like a eschatological lens, like Satan ultimately loses. And, like towards the latter part, like from Revelations, like 12 onwards, you find that the world is reeling from one disaster after another. So from the standpoint of logic, from the standpoint of system science, and the standpoint of common sense, they are bound to fail. Like and I just can't add much more to it,
Uh,
except yeah,
except
carry
what?
on.
Go ahead.
I don't know. I just forgot what I was about to say. A
I
lot of thoughts, at the same time, but to articulate them and to itemize them, it's going to be a problem. That's why I generally prefer writing, because like when you have too many thoughts at the same time, like you can itemize them, you can write a draft. But when you're speaking, like sometimes it just fleets, right through your mind. Yeah.
I know how that is.
Anyway,
And I like writing, and I'm hoping to start finally writing for Geopolitics and Empire in the coming year. The issue is it takes more time. I view it as higher quality in a sense because it's easy, it's cheap to talk. In a sense, it's faster. But to write
yeah,
for me, when I read books, when I consume writing, and when I approach writing, it's almost like a sacred act. Like the word that you put on paper, it has to be well thought out and organized, and like
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
that's how I see it. And what you were talking about, the talent crisis, it just made me think. In the past few months, I've been offered potential jobs like at international schools in China, in Baku, Azerbaijan, and Dubai recently, and that kind of makes me think of what you're saying. Is like, yeah, they're possibly that makes sense. If there's a talent crisis. And let me ask you about, in your book, you have a section where you're talking about dreams of a greater Eurasia. So you're looking at a fracturing world. You're looking at the elite who are attempting to impose global control amidst sort of like a Hunger Games situation. What are your thoughts when it comes to, you mentioned already Russia and China? They've just invited Putin back to G8. China's unveiling its, I call it the World Government 2.0, Xi Jinping's Global Governance Initiative. And Global Times just published an article saying China's down with the carbon schemes and the Global Digital Compact, which is the UN's Global Ministry of Truth. And so my question for you is there are these different perspectives in all media who say BRICS is going to save us. I was just reading an article from Sputnik by Pepe Escobar, who's talking about Sergei Glaziev's The Unit coin, and immediately I'm like, this is John Maynard Keynes's 1942 Bancor rebranded.
Yeah,
And I'm like,
yeah.
what are you guys talking about? You know,
Yeah.
and so what's your take on this idea of BRICS and multipolarity? But I think my view is that behind the scenes, if you peel back the veil, it's that same infrastructure of all of, the BlackRock, the investment banks, and that you see everywhere. Like here in Mexico, Rockefeller Foundation is running my city. Um, so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think like all the BRICS constituents, they have different agendas. I think where Russia is concerned, they want to be reunited with the current global system. But like it's basically like like when I look at this, like a major powers, especially the UN, SC, and so on, UN Security Council, it's basically like a mafia council. And then like it's in fact it's indistinguishable from a mafia council. Like a one leader, one couple would say, like I want more territory for my drug distribution, but that guy is getting in the way, and he points in the other direction. So basically that's what it's all about. To use a very simplistic, like a very down to earth, and like like a quite a depressing analogy, but that's what it is. And I, Russia definitely wants to be reintegrated into the global system. China, on the other hand, is a bit problematic because like China calls itself Chunko, the Middle Kingdom, you know, and they've always it's whether they're communists or whether they're traditionalists. And the Chinese government is also nationalist. So they blend, like tradition, nationalism, and communism at the same time. They wouldn't want to give up, this unique role that they've inherited over the past 4,000 years, and surrender, part of their sovereignty to a global system. And then, like you have Iran, which is not part of the BRICS core, but has this has the same mindset. We are Persians. We are even mentioned in the Bible, and the Bible speaks, very highly of Persians. The Persian kings were great kings. So why should we, like surrender our sovereignty, our uniqueness, to a global system? So right now, I guess like this multipolar, narrative has to be framed in the context of what they can get out of the system. What this these older civilizations and states can get out of the system. In fact, I also like, I've always like kept an eye out for Japan, which has always considered itself to be a unique civilization. And I was not surprised, in the election of the current, like a leader, the first female Japanese prime minister. And Japan has been trying its best to, like wriggle itself out of U.S. control to the extent possible. As way back as the 1950s, in fact, Shinzo Abe's grandfather was the prime minister at the time, tried doing that. And the US authorities, like officially relented. They relented to him, like relented to his request that Japan be rearmed, or at least, given, some leeway in terms of rearming, and, and gain, like full sovereignty. And and it was supposed to, sail through, because like that idea had a lot of support in Japan. But at the last moment, his own best friend turned against him and became the prime minister. I do not know the full story. I haven't, researched this, to a great extent. But I think the CIA, like manufactured a soft coup. And you see that happening again and again. For instance, like when you talk about operating systems, the first thing that comes to our mind is Windows and Apple. But do you know that the first global operating system should have been Japanese? It was called Throne.
I think you wrote about that? No, I learned about that from
Yeah,
one of
I
your
wrote about that.
articles.
And this is not even discussed that much in Japan. And when I wrote it, I did approach a Japanese professor, on LinkedIn. That was before I was kicked out of LinkedIn for, like questioning the COVID narrative. And he did a check. And he was surprised himself. And this guy's in technology. He's in artificial intelligence and so on. He was surprised himself that like a drone was being geared to be all-in-one operating system. That can be used for your desktop. That could be used in industries. It's still being used in industries. And knowing Japanese efficiency and reliability, it would have been a much better system than Windows with all its bugs and so on. So like you do have like a satanic global system that's trying to entrap all nations. And some nations are willing to play ball. They have forfeited any notion of sovereignty. At the same time, there are other nations that are also struggling in the closet, in the background, to regain some of the sovereignty. And Japan is one of them. China is definitely one of them, and Iran is one of them. Now, will they succeed? I do not know. I do not know. Maybe they might. Especially when you consider the fact that every plan to reunite the world, to bring in a global system has failed. And they can roll out their digital IDs and they can come up with a pan global digital ID and so on, but it will fail. Right now, Australia requires, they have passed a law requiring that everyone, I think those age 16 and below can't have access to social media or something. What was it about?
Yeah, something like that, where if they're under 16. Yeah, and I just read this morning, India is deploying some system with their phones or SIM cards where it's going to have to log you out every 6 hours. Like, are we good? Would you have to log in? I mean, imagine how many times you got to log in to these systems. It's kind of what you said earlier. It's not sustainable. it's
Yeah, it's not sustainable. And I'll tell you, that's also another drawback, or unanticipated fallout from this, from such panoptic systems. When teenagers can't get access to their, to the internet or social media, they might start talking to each other. They might start, socializing. They might start, going on and playing football, doing some mischievous stuff, fun, mischievous stuff that all teenagers do. And then they realize, we don't need that shit anyway. We don't need to.
I never thought about that. That's actually good news.
Yeah, I see positively, okay, no social media. Let's play cricket, or let's do something, fun, let's visit that abandoned, a farmhouse or something like that. You're not gonna, unless they have a very comprehensive panopticon, which combines internet access, biometric internet access with mobility, where you will need biometric access to get on a bus and so on. Teenagers will find a way to have fun. They need to have fun. It's an age where you need to have fun. So they will start talking to each other. They will probably start playing chess again, Monopoly, Ludo. These are games I grew up with, and they're quite fun. And so that's going to be a downside.
There's a silver lining to all of this. Yeah.
They will be less prone to digitally mediated propaganda. If this plan is carried out, they'll be less prone, or at least let me rephrase it another way. They stand a better chance. There will be a generation that stands a better chance of being less brainwashed than the generation prior. So again, it's going to backfire.
Just on that last point of the multipolar stuff, you being out in Asia contributing to RT, do you see a push towards a third world war, or Yeah, I don't know. Any final thoughts there? Um, because again, we're seeing China propose. It's like you said earlier, and I've used the same example of a Mexican cartel or a mafia, where I view all of these states as forms of mafias or factions. And I mean, even the article I saw today from here it is. It's from where is it? It's from China Daily, and it says recalibrating global governance, giving the global South its seat at the table, and talking about China's global governance initiative. And so it's like they're trying to get a better deal at the table. And so, but I
Yeah.
can see again, I can see a conflict exploding for different reasons, or
And let me tell you, one of the conflicts that will come about. You see, like when China engages with the global South, they're engaging with leaders and influencers and like academics and so on, who are who are nurtured and groomed by the Western deep states. You know, and and these guys are in a position to throw multiple spanners into the works, and China knows that. China knows that, but I guess like they also think we can bribe our way, through the global South. That's not going to happen because, like, as the Epstein case shows, it's not just about money being passed around. The higher you go up a ladder, the more dastardly things you need to do. Like the higher you are, in any nation, what the as you rise up, in the social political structure of any nation, the more blackmailable you are. It's no longer about receiving money, or and so on, because if that was the if that was the the only issue, then like it wouldn't be a much of a problem, honestly. But people have to do things that are blackmailable. Like, take for instance human trafficking. Like I was told, or rather, like I have read, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with this institute. It's called the Rutherford Institute or something.
with John White,
Okay.
the Rutherford Institute,
Yeah, yeah.
John Whitehead, you mean?
Yeah, that's the guy. That's the guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
he's been on the podcast 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And he he had studied, human trafficking to a great extent, especially child trafficking. And according to him, child trafficking, during the Super Bowl is rampant. You know, child trafficking, or at least trading in child trafficking. I'm not sure the exact mechanism involved, but he has repeated it several times, and no one has debunked him. So this child trafficking thing is a global, the, a problem. It's a malaise, and you have politicians, you have senior police officers, you have senior military officers involved, either facilitating this trade or looking the other way. The customs, of many nations are completely corrupt. So when another nation or another competing power, wants to, gain leverage in the global south, like China is doing, they'll have to deal with people who have been compromised by the Western deep state, and that's going to be a problem because these guys are basically owned by the Western deep state.
Yeah, there's a section on your book where you write about that sort of stuff and the elite, and you say another recruit had
Yeah,
passed the final test. The alliance's rule was simple: promotion required
yeah,
compromise and a willingness to perform the darkest deeds. No one advanced without insurance against defection. Let me ask you about sort of the Mad Max world. So maybe it becomes a result of them trying to build Tower of Babel 2.0 and systems collapse, maybe wars break out, this, that, and the other. And immediately I'm thinking of, The Road, Cormac McCarthy, Book of Eli, Mad Max. Uh, in some of the actors in your book talk about basically pulling the electricity, going Amish, analog, which in many ways is the answer to the dystopia, right? I'm just reading
Yeah,
your book. Like I know I need to get out of the city. It's not as simple, but but even in your book you paint it's not nowhere is it simple, even in the rural areas, because you can have marauding bands, right, of gangs, and
exactly.
so you really don't have
Yeah.
one perfect answer. But I guess maybe the question would be, do you think whether it's because of their attempt to build this structure and the chaos that they cause, maybe they redirect all of our energy use towards the data centers, and that blows something up, or we don't have enough electricity. We live with intermittent electricity. Do you think somehow we'll end up with like a Mad Max type world, or we'll just keep going as we are?
Well, I think there's going to be a collapse. How it's going to happen? Well, it can happen in a variety of ways. There's a tech bubble right now, specifically an AI bubble that might burst, and that might lead to another Great Depression. And that is in my as I see it, that would be a soft landing. Although a Great Depression would be a hard landing, so hard societal landing, but that would be a soft landing compared to the other scenarios. The most likely scenario I thought of was, again, the takedown of global utilities, electricity, and of course, when electricity goes down, water, water would be in short supply, and a takedown of the communications network as well. But I find it hard to see how it might work, because at the same time, you need electricity to control populations. Your biometric ID will not work in a world, where there's a lot of outages. Uh, at the same time, when they implement these systems, I think, yeah, when they implement the systems, you can expect a lot of outages. In fact, if you do a search right now, you can use any of the AI tools, and ask that AI tool, have outages increased in the past 1 year. The answer would most definitely be yes. I'll wager a bet, a small bet, that the answer would be yes. In fact, did
Yeah,
I did
I mean,
check,
I can already off the top of my head. I mean, you had like Portugal and Spain, and I think England, and
yeah,
even here in Mexico, I think there was in another part of Mexico. So yeah, they're happening at an increasing rate.
yeah. So you see, when these outages occur, those who have been digitally imprisoned would find their chance to escape. Let's say, they have a system where they implement a social credit system where you're only allowed to, your social mobility is restricted, uh, and you can't travel outside the town. Now, this was implemented during the Soviet era. Of course, they used an analog ID pass and so on, internal passport. Now, when there's an outage, you know that's your chance to get out of Dodge, so to speak. That's your chance to get out of the hellscape. So when outages increase, the system will fail, and already outages are increasing, and we are adding more and more complexity to the system. And I'm wondering, whether it can succeed. And no matter how I look at it, how I game it out, it's not going to succeed. You know, there are too many legacy systems. There are layers and layers upon complexities in the system, not just digital systems, the governance systems as well, and they are not communicating well with each other. Like in systems theory, there are two pitfalls you need to avoid. One is a complexity catastrophe, and one is a complexity error. So, the optimal zone of operation is, between these two traps, twin traps. Now, in one of the traps, the constituent units are too coupled, too tightly coupled with each other. So like innovation is impossible. It's pretty much like hierarchical and so on. Whereas on the flip side, they are not very well coupled. So our patchwork, our global system is a patchwork of complexity errors and complexity catastrophes. So like I don't just see them succeeding. It's just from a systems theory angle, they just can't succeed. They'll try something very dastardly. As I said, like they might even go for the nuclear option. Like why not have a Indo-Pakistani nuclear exchange? Who knows? Like to spook other nations into like surrendering their sovereignty. This is what happens. Like when nations are sovereign, you have bad actors in each countries, hijacking nukes and then firing at each other and so on. So, but I again, like I don't think they will succeed.
If we fast forward, then maybe towards the end of this thought experiment, so they're going to try. They tried COVID 1984. Might try it again with bird flu as they're talking now, or maybe they're just testing us to see our reaction, how many people they think will comply. Hopefully, you're right that even less people will comply now. Maybe war, conflict. There's a book. I've been reading an article. Again, I just don't have the time. I'm just trying to survive with podcasts and memberships. I bought a book from the 1970s, academic book. It's somewhere around here, and it's a guy who was, I think, partially financed again by Rockefeller or one of those projects. And he says in the book, we want to depopulate. We want to establish a global scientific dictatorship. And what did he say? We can use war with at least a tactical mini nuke, an event, as you cited, India, Pakistan, to scare people into submission. So they might try that. But let's fast forward. I'm just curious on how you see this playing out from a biblical prophetic perspective, because I view things just progressively getting worse, whatever that worse looks like, whether it's digital dystopia or a mix of partial dystopia mixed with increased famine, economy can collapse, systems can collapse. My threat might not be digitalized ID. Like if I walk outside my house, in my mind right now, I'm thinking digital ID and I won't be able to do anything. But it's like, well, what if order breaks down, and there's no food in the store? And around the city, it's not safe, right? And so that could be another. So just your thoughts on how you think. Okay, let's go beyond COVID installations, wars. How do you sort of see things wrapping up, so to speak?
Well, like in Luke 21 verse 28, Jesus said, like, when these things began to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. And that's what keeps me going. From a scriptural angle, I'm seeing that. From a scientific angle, I'm coming to the same conclusion as well. Okay, and what I see happening is like Christ said, like he'll come at a time when you least expect it. When you least expect it. A lot of people have this. They have this eschatological mise en scene backdrop. Where certain things have to happen. Consecutively and so on, and that's when towards the ends, towards a certain threshold, and they use Israel as a reference point. Totally dispensationalist and totally Christian Zionist and totally wrong in my opinion. I think what Christ said, is making more sense by the day. When you hear of these things, all this dystopian stuff, rumors of war, famine, pestilences, and stuff like that, he's coming at a time, he's coming soon, and when you least expect it. And I cannot see, this world surviving on its own for far too long. It's fracturing. Global systems are just fracturing. The food supply. I mean, don't even get me started on that. Like our the quality of our food is deteriorating, to a great extent. And then like our newer batch of medicines are just junk. They create more problems. Now I'm not, anti-medicine. It, if you are, like I don't mind taking, like older antibiotics if I need to, like those, that were developed in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even, in the mid 90s. It's fine, all those medications, because like they have a track record and so on. But at the same time, uh, everything that we have tried, like in many areas, have just failed. What we have succeeded so far is in communicating these failures to the rest of the world through AI, through the internet. In fact, the internet is the conduit through which we see how the world is failing. The internet was supposed to be the conduit through which, the world was supposed to be united. It was supposed to usher in the panopticon, but it's now the conduit. At least, among those, I'm acquainted with, and I have a very small circle of friends and acquaintances, but they see it the same way as well. And all across the world, if you look at blog posts or the comment section, like of any news site, you'll find a lot of cynicism over politicians, over bureaucrats, and so on. Lots and lots of cynicism. So how are you going to, implement, your new world order wet dreams on such people? Like, I think, let's take, Donald Trump and his MAGA administration. That was the U.S. deep states, in my opinion. That was the U.S. deep states' last throw of the dice. And he himself said, like, once I'm elected, you don't have to worry, about another election anymore. I think like the U.S. deep state knows, like, like they don't have a backup plan anymore, because a lot of people do not trust the Democrats. They do not trust the Republicans. They see them, as sons of the same bitch, to use a crude expression. And therefore, they'll be quite desperate. And there's also a theological angle to this as well. I mean, many of these globalists are into the occult. I mean, like I've written about Alice Bailey and and a host of others, who are part of the unified, global, United Nations movement and so on. Uh, and, like they could try something. They will likely try something before 2030. And we have to ask ourselves, why is 2030 such a magical, date?
I'm always bringing up that point, and it's funny because I've noticed people independently also coming. I see maybe where you're going, but go on. Why are they obsessed with 2030, 2035?
Okay, like I mean, like I guess, like if you take Revelations 12, as a reference point, Jesus would have been born on September 11, 3 BC. So fast forward 2,000 years, when his ministry began. I think, his ministry, if you, if you add, like 3 BC, and and 2025 is, 2026 might be the year when his ministry began, and 2030 might be the year when he was crucified. So they will have to unveil a counterfeit, an antichrist figure of sorts. Now so they will try something like that, and numbers, for some reason, is very important to these people. Then again, I'm not surprised, because numbers are numbers are an integral part of the occult. And therefore, they will try something, like dastardly, but I don't see that working out. I was really scared, during the onset of COVID-19. I thought like this was like the antichrist system, like unfolding in real time. And man, like I spent countless sleepless nights about it. And I stay in the while I stay in the city, I stay on the outskirts, and it's linked to the highlands in Malaysia. Like right outside is where the Malaysian rainforest starts. And I even had the idea of like packing my stuff and just walking like deep into the forest and hide somewhere. But like it was bad. It was bad, and churches would not allow anyone who was unvaccinated in. So I stopped attending churches. Uh, and but after that, like you when we got to see that the emperors of this universe, they don't have much clothes on. They've been like they've been shown to be naked, to use a like a biblical expression. So, but like yeah, I like many others, and I'm sure you as well would agree that they will try something between now and 2030. By the way, well, why do you think 2030 is so important? Like, what's the general consensus out there? I mean, you have interviewed a lot of people,
Well,
and
my view was kind of just similar to yours. Well, I mean, again, it's just a thesis that people can laugh all they want. I'll laugh back at their silly ideas that we evolved from fish, all that sort of stuff. But um, I believe, the Earth is the young Earth, 6,000 years. And then if you take the 4,000 plus, as you said, two, that's symbolically with the 6 days, 6,000 years. And so you kind of come full circle. Kind of to your point, why they're working towards the 2030s, that may or may not come to be. And so 2030s might come and there'll be a lot of chaos, but we might still be here. And so it's just one thesis that I have, and I'm going to keep living life as I am. I'm not going to be waiting around to be raptured in that sense. I don't believe in these things like the pre-tribulation rapture, and
yeah,
it's very American, isn't it? I listen to some of these people, and we agree on some things and disagree on others, and I listen to them say we're going to be beamed up before there's any trouble, and I'm like, it's just so American to just it's an idol when you think of idolatry, just to love comfort. That's actually one of the reasons I wanted to leave America, because it was just too comfortable. And I'm like,
yeah,
I want to live on the edge somewhere. Like that's why I go to Mongolia and Mexico and, and Kazakhstan. And it's not healthy because no, you would expect suffering. And you shouldn't be afraid of suffering either. That's the Christian, like most Christians suffered throughout a large part of history. You should actually, not welcome it, but not create in your mind like, oh, we're just going to be beamed up, and like, no, hello.
yeah. Like I used to attend a lot of. I mean, I'm from the Oriental Orthodox Church. In fact, I hail from one of the oldest Christian communities in the world. Like we were descended from first century Christians, and like I remember, like some of our elders telling us that we don't, we are not supposed to turn the book of Revelations and the book of Daniel, at least the prophetic parts of Daniel, into dogma. Now, we can have a personal opinion on how things are going to pan out. That's fine. It's your personal opinion. You might even have an epiphany or two about, like things that are described in Daniel and Ezekiel and so on. But you're not supposed to turn it into a rigid doctrine, because you do not know what it really means. The evangelicals, on the other hand, keep peddling this stuff, and then they keep changing the narrative, the story. And you have Christian Zionists, like coming up with all kinds of lies, historical lies, you know, to uh, uh, to buttress their doctrine. For instance, recently someone shared a link with me, about how like the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. You know, the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago under Titus. But according to this guy, it was not the Romans who destroyed the temple. It was the Arab legion under under the Romans, because the Arabs always had this hatred of the Jews and so on. For Pete's sake, like I told him, just use Chat GPT. like they are owned by Jewish people, and get your facts right, and I did that, like there were no Arabs, in that Roman contingent, maybe some Phoenicians and so on, but even Josephus, the Jewish historian, like specifically states, these were Roman soldiers, and like auxiliary soldiers, who are non-Roman, were not allowed to lead the vanguard, as far as I know. Like they were placed, like at the rear, and so on. So, and like, man, this is the reason why I avoid Christian Zionists altogether. Uh, they, to them, like any lie can be used to justify their doctrine. They have Israel as their, like idol. They're looking at Israel, for signs of the end times. Just like the Pharisees, they were looking at signs everywhere except, at Jesus. So, and like any lie, any convenient lie, would satisfy them. And you wouldn't believe how many historical lies, and even like assaults on the common sense that they would resort to, in order to buttress their end times doctrine. So yeah, like the world will not end, may not end, by 2030, and we might live, beyond that. And like I don't believe, in this. And another thing about this evangelical churches, when they start speaking of the end times, I remember when I was younger, I was so afraid. I mean, the church is not a place where, like you go and you acquire fear. Church is a place where, like where you're edified, you become stronger. But instead, in these churches, you come out, like feeling more petrified, more insecure, and so on. At least that has been my experience, and I think the experience of many others as well. So no, like I would not tolerate, like even if someone sends me a link, oh, look at this, what this preacher said, I will not even look at it, like for me, like it's my walk with Christ that no matter how imperfect I am, I'm really, really imperfect. Like I just try and walk along the narrow and winding road, and the narrow and winding road is often lonely. you know it's not a highway where you meet a lot of people. It's often lonely, and like that loneliness can get to you, but that's good enough for me. I'm learning to live with that, lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah, and I went through that phase many years ago. I read some of these types of authors that you talk about, and it's become a bit of a clown show. And I've had some of their books, and their predictions haven't come true, and they create these convoluted systems to come to these strange conclusions. But I do want to ask you one more thing. You wrote a recent article, which I enjoyed, titled on your Substack, "The Most Taboo Subject on Earth," and you talk about sort of like, is that the article? I think it is. Yeah, where you talk about controlled, sort of designated dissidents, and I feel like more and more I'm learning. It's everywhere, but just your thought. What are you seeing when it comes to you consuming Substack and blogs and articles and independent media and podcasting? Are you noticing that there are people who are supposed to be sort of the resistance who are sort of promoting the New World Order?
Yeah, in fact, like I mean, like I'm seeing a lot of them, and generally, like if you're speaking truth to power, to use an old cliche, you will not. First of all, you will not get the kind of reach, global reach, like millions of viewers and so on, that some of these so-called dissidents like Tucker Carlson's and so on, like no, like it's just impossible. So these are the kind of people I call designated dissidents. I really don't watch what they say. Occasionally, I stumble upon short clips, very short clips. That's all I can stand. Candace Owens, okay, like I've watched like some of her like podcasts, maybe a dozen. Now she brings up some great points, but at the same time, like to me, it's a form of destruction, because the greatest crisis ever, the greatest genocidal attempt ever has been COVID-19. And you always need to go back to that. If you need a reality check, it's not about, I mean, yeah, Bridget Macron could be a man, yeah, could be, like a bunch of birds and angels who might be, at the helms of governments. But, at the same time, you need to go back to COVID-19 and see, and remember, refresh yourself, with what, they were planning. You know, I think, it was a mixture of planned genocide. You know, they were planning to bring in, a global panopticon, a new world government. But at the same time, they were also stress testing to see, the level of obedience throughout the world. The first two didn't pan out because people weren't dying. The human body is far more resilient than they probably assumed. I mean, they were probably trying to induce some kind of AIDS, and that's where we get the term WAIDS, vaccine-induced acquired immune deficiency syndrome. But like despite taking boosters and so on, you would have expected a much higher death toll. I think like the death toll worldwide right now, if you extrapolate from Steve Kirsch's studies, probably in the range of 40 million, and then like probably another 200 million or 300 million who have been permanently damaged one kind or the other. But still, if depopulation was the goal, it was a miserable failure. And not only was it a miserable failure, or shall I say, it was a miserable failure because now people have awakened to the fact that, we should go easy with this vaccines and, modern medicines and so on. In fact, the CDC did admit just today, I think, or yesterday, that the COVID vaccines had actually killed children. So they're admitting that. Now, are they doing that on the orders of the Trump regime? Because he's embroiled. He's knee high, not knee high. He's neck high in the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Now, if he, those associated with his regime, come out and speak with a lot of candor about COVID-19 being a global genocidal attempt, that will make many heads turn. And, people will start forgetting about Jeffrey Epstein, they will, concentrate on this. So is that a ploy? I do not know, it definitely is a bit too coincidental where I'm concerned. Suddenly the CDC, is admitting these things. And there are regimes, in throughout the world, uh, they cannot afford to admit, that mass vaccination and mandates and so on were a mistake. The entire edifice of power would just collapse, if they admitted that. There's a control freak nation just south of Malaysia. I'll not name the nation, and they cannot admit it. In fact, they have been casting people like Luc Montagnier, RFK Jr., and so on as conspiracy theorists. So yeah.
So where do you then? I mean, we've covered a lot. Is there anything that we haven't touched on you think is important? Any other thoughts? Final thoughts?
I think we have covered a lot of grounds, and maybe we can have another chat sometime down the line. If you missed out anything, crosstalk or something, with others present. So
I think that's a good idea. Actually, I think is it next week. It's rare on Geopolitics and Empire, but there's going to be 3 guests, so there's going to be 4 of us, and so maybe I can do something like that more often. So you're again then, and very. So I think coming away from your chat, very, I guess, silver lining, white pill. The system is going to fail. So keep looking for ways to put spokes in their wheel.
this is a guarantee. They will fail, even from a a scientific viewpoint. I mean, they will scare us, and like we will be spooked, by whatever they are planning or whatever they are going to execute. But they will fail guaranteed. They just don't have the wherewithal, the human wherewithal, to carry out such a plan. And maybe that's why they are trying, plunging headlong into AI and so on, thinking that but AI will also hallucinate and turn against them. Like who knows?
Yeah, you just maybe have a thought like because of what you outlined, they won't have enough humans to do what they say. So maybe they're hoping, okay, plan B, we forget the humans. We're going to program the robots to be our,
Yeah,
executors. And so, but maybe some of the humans can launch viruses and infect the. There are endless scenarios here.
yeah, and there, like I have to add something, we have been given, visual demonstrations of what these robots can supposedly accomplish. Apart from drones, I don't see, like a mass deployment, of any of this, contraptions. Uh, humanoid robots, for example, like what we see on TV is one that succeeded. I mean, Russia, they tried, to unveil a new, AI robot, and it just collapsed on stage. And someone caught it on camera, and that's how we got to know about it. And a lot of this stuff is happening in the background because the amount of complexity involved, it's just,
They've faked a lot
it's
of the demos. I've seen later they've come out and they said someone was remote controlling it or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of this, robotic systems actually failed. Now, where they succeeded were, narrow parameter industrial robots like they use in cars. Now, that, industrial robots will do a great job, no questions about it. And industrial robots can be used for deep sea mining, and so on, but not for more complex tasks, specific tasks, where some a great degree of versatility is needed. Yeah. So good luck to all these big tech billionaires, tech pros, who are banking on AI, to to uh, run the organizations, because one day that's going to be a massive hallucination, a massive outage, something terrible is going to happen. Maybe they're banking on that, or maybe they're going to use that as an excuse, to try and push through the digital find scapegoat. I mean, look at the supposed Trump assassination attempts. We still do not know, the identities, and I mean, we just have a name and some sparse details about the alleged assassins, but nothing much beyond that. It's not like Lee Harvey Oswald, where everything about his life, was combed through and regurgitated and so on. What's his name, Thomas Crook or something like
Well,
that.
I mean, I think
He's
it's
supposed to be the guy.
intentional. I think a lot of us
Yeah, I know.
question the
Yeah, exactly.
actual event.
So likewise, when you have a major catastrophe somewhere, maybe in a nuclear plant or something, they will find a patsy, blame it on him, and yeah, like a failure of a nuclear power plant would be another way, to try and attempt to bring in, a unified order. So the possibilities are endless, but they will fail.
And just one more thing, I saw a clip today, and I pulled up here. It's from the Diary of a CEO, which is it's I like the channel. It's business stuff, an entrepreneur. He's got millions of followers. Was
The
that
diary, the
of a,
diarrhea of the
no
is it the diary?
the Diary of a CEO? I forget the
Okay.
guy's the host name, but it
Yeah, I
was
know, I know.
it was 6 months ago. He interviewed Simon Sinek, and in the clip that I shared, I think it's on my X. The host said he was talking to he wouldn't name the name, but it was a CEO of some major AI company, and he says that this guy told him where he goes outwardly and says everything's going to be amazing, it's all working, but then he says behind the scenes, he actually he has the same conclusion. He's basically implying that this AI CEO says none of this is working, it's all going to fail and collapse. But that he doesn't care because he's on a trip, he's on a power trip. So he gave us an insight into the psyche of these people. That these guys'
Yeah,
egos are explode. They have all this money and power, but at the same time, he says behind the scenes, he's the opposite of what you see on the stage. And he wouldn't name the name, but he says it's probably somebody that we all know. But that just confirming your conclusion, and I'm going to bookmark that for later viewing. Simon Sinek
yeah.
on the Diary of a CEO. But your links are in the description. You write for RT.com. People can get your book on Amazon, your Substack, Dr. Mathew Maavak. Any other places people should go? What's the best place to get your book?
No, I mean, uh, they can also read my Substack, and then my book, an article about my book is pinned right at the top. Uh, it's just they just have to Google the electric reckoning, and this should pop up, or use Bing. Bing would be a better choice because Google does shadow ban me to a great extent. So yeah,
Where in
or you
this?
could or you could just include a link to the Amazon, like the
Yeah,
Amazon link.
the link is in the description, and I'm also banned on the Google search engine. If people type in geopolitics and empire, you won't get my website or virtually
Yeah, yeah,
anything. Last time I checked, but again, I'm about almost halfway through your book, and I really do enjoy it, even though it's fiction. And I think there's still a lot of useful stuff we can learn from it and create these scenarios in our head that help us plan. But highly recommend it, and thank you for the chat. And then we'll hopefully we get an update from you from Asia after the new year.
yeah. Okay, then. You take care.